The farmhouse sat in ruins, splintered wood jutting from broken walls, dust hanging thick in the golden afternoon light. Private Eli Carter pressed his eye to the scope, heart hammering but mind sharp. Far below, at exactly 480 yards, a German officer moved along the road, unaware that a single shot could change everything. Eli's fingers traced the tiniest gap between two beams overhead, no wider than a playing card, and he calculated the impossible. Every soldier around him had laughed at the idea, shaking their heads, muttering that such a shot was madness. Yet here he was, steady, focused, every muscle aligned, every angle measured. A bead of sweat slid down his temple as the officer paused, scanning the valley, his uniform catching the sun. Eli inhaled, adjusted for the wind, the subtle incline, the deflection of the round against the beam. The farmhouse smelled of dust, gun oil, and smoke, the ruins echoing with distant artillery. Round him, the squad watched, tension nodding. Their stomachs, Sergeant Miller muttered under his breath, "You're crazy, Carter." Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was beyond fear. This was geometry, physics, instinct. Time slowed. The officer took a step forward, unaware that his fate had already been calculated. Eli's thumb brushed the trigger, exhaled slowly, and the shot rang out, a sharp, clean crack across the valley. In that instant, a life ended, a strategy shifted, and the impossible became reality. The squad froze, eyes wide, hearts racing. No one had expected it. No one had believed it could happen, yet it did. Eli lowered the rifle slightly, scanning the abandoned landscape, knowing this single shot would echo far beyond this ruined farmhouse, and perhaps save dozens of lives yet to come. Eli Carter wasn't always a soldier. He had grown up on a small farm, learning patience and precision from years of hunting and fixing machinery with his father. Those early lessons stayed with him, etched into muscle memory and instinct. When war came, he had enlisted immediately. Driven by duty but also by a quiet confidence that he could make a difference where others might falter. By the time his unit reached this small French village, weeks of skirmishes and artillery fire had hardened the men. The farmhouse had become their temporary stronghold, a vantage point amid a shattered landscape of smoke and rubble. Lies. Squad was weary faces, streaked with dirt and exhaustion but alert, knowing every step outside could be fatal. Sergeant Miller, gruff and battle-hardened, questioned every unconventional move. But he trusted Eli's instincts enough to tolerate the strange calculations. Radio man Daniels leaned against a wall, cleaning his weapon, while Medic Harper checked supplies, worry etched in every line of his face. Eli crouched in the attic, studying the beams above, noticing the smallest gaps, the faintest angles. This wasn't just a rifle shot. It was a problem in physics, geometry, and patience. Every soldier around him doubted it, thinking his obsession with tiny structural gaps was a waste of time. Yet Eli had confidence, a quiet certainty. Every detail mattered: the slope of the hill, the direction of the wind, the timing of the officers' patrol. His mind replayed childhood lessons of sightlines, trajectories, and angles. If he calculated correctly, this shot could prevent countless deaths, saving his squad and others from the deadly artillery that had haunted the valley for weeks. The stakes were clear. Act or watch more men die, repeating the same futile attempts others had made before. Eli adjusted his rifle one more time, ready to challenge everything they thought they knew about distance, angles, and the limits of a single soldier. The valley outside the shattered farmhouse was alive with danger. German patrols moved like shadows across the open fields, their boots crunching on gravel, rifles at the ready. Oh God. Squad huddled, tension coiling tight in their chests. Sergeant Miller muttered curses under his breath, scanning the horizon for the telltale flash of a sniper's rifle or the glint of a scope. Each movement in the distance could mean death. Each sound could trigger artillery fire. Eli's eyes, however, remained fixed on the gap between the beams above, measuring, calculating, anticipating. Weeks of fighting had taught him one thing. Rules and standard doctrine weren't enough. Lives depended on creativity, on seeing angles that others ignored. He traced the path of the officer below, timing his patrol, noting every pause and shift in stance. The wind whispered through the broken windows, teasing the dust into small spirals, subtly altering the trajectory he had calculated. Every fraction of an inch mattered. Eli adjusted his elevation, imagining the round ricocheting off the beam above, descending into the unsuspecting officer's path. Around him, his squad questioned every movement. Radioman Daniels leaned closer, whispering, "You really think this will work?" Eli didn't flinch. "It has to," he replied, voice low, steady. "Harper." The medic shook his head. "Miss, we're all dead," he muttered. Eli only nodded, focusing. This wasn't just about the shot. It was about strategy, timing, saving lives. The tension mounted as the German officer moved closer to the predicted point. Eli's mind raced, adjusting for variables. Air density, temperature shifts, the slope of the valley, the precise angle at which the steel beam would deflect the round. His memories of his childhood flashed, hunting rabbits on the farm, lining up. Impossible shots, the thrill of perfect precision. Every shot he had ever taken had prepared him for this moment. Then the unexpected happened. A German patrol spotted the squad's position, sending a warning flare into the sky. Panic erupted. In the group, soldiers scrambled for cover, weapons raised, hearts pounding. Eli remained calm. The officer, oblivious to the sudden alert, continued his patrol, moving directly into the corridor he had measured. Eli's hands steadied, muscles locked, breath synchronized with the rhythm of the officer's steps. One miscalculation, one second, too early or too late, and the plan would fail. Minutes stretched like hours as Eli visualized the shot. Every angle, every trajectory, every potential deflection calculated in real time. He repositioned slightly, sliding across the broken floor, rifle leveled, scope aligned with near-perfect precision. Sergeant Miller barked orders to keep low, but Eli ignored the chatter, entirely absorbed in the moment. The officer stopped, scanned the valley, and shifted his stance, unknowingly aligning with the narrow target window. Eli exhaled slowly, heart steady despite the chaos around him. This was at the culmination of skill, instinct, and daring. The first click of the rifle's bolt sounded unnaturally loud in the attic, echoing through the ruins. Eli's thumb brushed the trigger. Every man in the squad held their breath. Outside, the German officer paused, looking directly toward the farmhouse, unaware that his fate was sealed. The wind remained favorable, the angle correct, the beam above positioned exactly as Eli had calculated. All variables aligned, yet the impossible still seemed improbable. In that frozen moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Eli's mind replayed the calculations, the childhood lessons, the months of hardship. He thought of the men who had fallen before him, the lives at stake, the artillery fire that had claimed so many. There was no room for error. Okay? Then, slowly, deliberately, he squeezed the trigger, sending the round careening toward the beam. Angled the officer. Time stretched. The shot was more than a bullet. It was the embodiment of every lesson Eli had learned, every instinct honed, every risk taken. The shot had been fired, rolled across the valley. The cane, the waiting, the watching, the silent suspense before the impossible revealed itself. The echo of Eli's shot hung in the valley like a held breath. Every soldier in the squad froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding, waiting for the impossible to reveal itself. The German officer, moving with the confidence of someone unaware of danger, staggered as the round struck with a precision no one thought possible. He went down silently, his body collapsing behind the dirt and rubble, unseen at first, but unmistakable once the panic spread through the enemy ranks. Outside, the German patrol erupted into chaos. Shouts of alarm, frantic footsteps, and the clatter of dropped weapons filled the valley. Soldiers ran toward cover, unsure of what had just happened. Eli's squad huddled, tense but alive, watching the enemy unravel. Sergeant Miller stared, mouth agape, then turned to Eli, finally understanding that the impossible had just happened. "By God, you did it," he muttered, all mixed with fear. Eli's hands were steady, but his mind raced through every variable. Once more, confirming the calculations, replaying the angle, the beam, the distance. Every factor had aligned perfectly, but the courage to take the shot, the willingness to defy conventional wisdom, had been what truly mattered. He exhaled slowly, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, and lowered the rifle slightly, scanning. The chaos, the German patrol regrouped behind rocks and broken walls, trying to assess the situation. Their officer was down, but their training didn't allow them to panic entirely. Still, the coordinated advance they had planned for weeks was thrown into disarray. Artillery calls went unanswered, movement stalled, and every second bought Eli's squad more time. Inside the farmhouse, his fellow soldiers looked at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Daniels, the radio man, shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe that worked. Nobody could have made that shot." Harper, the medic, was silent, relief etched on his face. Even Sergeant Miller, the gruff veteran who had doubted every unconventional tactic, now nodded slowly. Eli had not just hit a target. He had rewritten the battlefield rules in a single, breathtaking moment. But there was no time to celebrate. German reinforcements would soon arrive. Eli's shot had won precious minutes, but the fight was far from over. Every man in the squad understood that their survival depended on continuing to adapt, to exploit every angle, every weakness, and every shadow. Eli felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. One calculated risk had changed the course of the battle, but more risk would be needed to ensure they survived the day. The valley lay in stunned silence for a moment, broken only by distant artillery and the hurried footsteps of retreating soldiers. Eli knew that what he had done would echo far beyond this farmhouse, that his calculations and courage had saved lives in ways no one outside this attic would ever know. The impossible shot was complete. The impossible had become reality. Yet, the fight was far from over. The valley seemed calm now, but calm was a lie. Eli Carter knew better. The German officer was down, the immediate threat neutralized, yet the enemy would regroup, analyze, and adapt. Across the shattered landscape, artillery crews shifted positions, recalculated firing coordinates, and scouted for new observation posts. Every second counted. Eli couldn't afford to let the squad relax. Sergeant Miller whispered orders to reposition, urging the men to use the ruins for cover while keeping eyes on likely enemy approaches. Eli's mind, however, was already racing ahead, thinking about every angle, every trajectory that might come next. The beam gap shot had worked, but it was only the beginning. Other observation posts, just like the one they had just taken down, awaited further action. And these posts weren't just concrete and steel, they were calculated death traps. As the squad moved cautiously through the rubble, Eli crouched, scanning the horizon, analyzing angles, mentally sketching diagrams in his head. Every broken wall, every fallen beam, every shadow became a potential threat and a potential advantage. The enemy had already begun moving small patrols to assess the loss of their officer. If Eli and his squad hesitated, lives would be lost in the coming hours. Harper, the medic, leaned close, voice low but urgent. "We can't hold here forever. They'll send more troops." Eli nodded, eyes narrowing. "We don't need to hold. We need to strike smart, one calculated move at a time." Miller's eyebrows knitted together in disbelief, but he trusted Eli's judgment. There was no time for debate. The situation demanded precision and speed. Eli thought of the soldiers who had fallen before him, men who had tried conventional approaches and failed. The officer from the last regiment, the young private who had been overzealous, and the others, each name etched into his memory. Their deaths were reminders, a guide, and a warning. Mistakes in this valley had cost lives. Precision, ingenuity, and courage were the only path forward. He paused on a ridge, binoculars trained on a distant German strongpoint, similar to the one they had just neutralized. He calculated distances, measured the slope of the terrain, considered wind and temperature, and mentally traced the round's path as he had with the first shot. If executed correctly, they could disable the next observation post without suffering casualties. Eli's pulse steadied. This wasn't luck. This was strategy, calculation, and the audacity to attempt what no one else would dare. Minutes passed. The enemy was regrouping, cautious and confused. Eli signaled the squad, moving in silent coordination, shadows slipping between ruins and dead trees. Every motion was deliberate, every breath controlled. Our valley had become a chessboard, each piece waiting to fall in place. Eli's mind raced with calculations, angles, and contingencies, already plotting the next impossible shot. Then, in the distance, movement caught his eye. A German officer stepping into an exposed firing slit. It's perfectly aligned with a narrow structural gap in the roof. Eli's heart skipped a beat. The opportunity presented itself, just like before, impossible, improbable, but within reach. His hand hovered over the rifle, finger on the trigger. Eyes locked on the geometry that could once again save lives. The impossible had been achieved, once. Now, the valley demanded that Eli make the next impossible choice. The shot rang out across the valley, carrying with it the weight of months of fear, calculation, and risk. Eli's round hit the steel beam just as he had predicted, ricocheting downward with precision into the exposed German officer. There was a beat of silence, then the chaos erupted once more. Scouts, scrambling boots, and the crash of hastily discarded equipment filled the air. But this time, the Americans had gained control. The valley, previously a killing field, was now theirs to maneuver through. Eli's squad exhaled collectively, relief washing over them, yet the reality of the moment settled like a stone in their chests. Lives had been spared by the unthinkable. Geometry, patience, and the courage to defy doctrine. The officer's fall disrupted the enemy chain of command. Artillery calls faltered, patrols froze in uncertainty. And every calculated move the Germans had relied on became chaotic improvisation. Eli's mind replayed the shot, reanalyzing every angle, every variable. It had worked, but only because he had trusted his calculations and instinct. Sergeant Miller approached, slapping a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Ha! I don't know how you did it, son, but you saved this whole ridge. Every man out there owes you their life." Eli shook his head. Exhausted but resolute. "It wasn't me," he said quietly. "It was the angles, the calculations. It was taking a chance when no one else would. That's what saved them." Miller nodded slowly, understanding that what Eli had done was more than skill. It was innovation born from necessity. Across the valley, the remaining German soldiers attempted to regroup, but their morale had fractured. The officer who had been neutralized had been the linchpin of their observation and artillery coordination. Without him, they struggled to organize effective defenses, and Eli's squad advanced under cover, taking ground that would have been impossible under standard doctrine. Every step they took was now safer, every movement guided by the knowledge that their ingenuity had created a tactical advantage. Inside the shattered farmhouse, Eli allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. He thought of the men who had died trying conventional methods and of the ones he had just protected. The hollow weight of survivor's guilt pressed against him, but it was tempered by the undeniable truth. Strategy, courage, and creative thinking had triumphed over brute force. The valley was quieter now, filled with the distant echoes of a disrupted enemy. And for the first time in weeks, the American soldiers could see a glimmer of hope. Eli's squad began to regroup, reloading, checking their positions, ensuring every man was accounted for. Daniels, the radio man, approached and whispered, "You've changed the way we fight. You know that, right?" Eli smiled faintly, fatigue and satisfaction mingling. "Maybe," he said, "but it's not about me, so I'm making sure. The next guy lives. Harper?" The medic offered a nod of agreement. "And thanks to you, they will." The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the valley. The chaos had settled into cautious silence, the immediate threat neutralized. Eli's mind, however, remained alert, already calculating angles for a potential enemy, reinforcements, anticipating moves, preparing for the next engagement. Victory was temporary, but knowledge and preparation had shifted the balance. That night, squad set up camp within the ruins. Fires burned low, and men whispered quietly about the shots, the angles, the courage it took to defy doctrine. Eli sat apart, sketching diagrams in the dirt, teaching quietly, showing the principles behind the shot without drawing undue attention. Knowledge spread, not through orders or manuals, but through demonstration, mentorship, and shared experience. Way true innovation in war often spreads. The impact of one shot rippled far beyond its immediate success. Lives were saved, tactics were rewritten, and soldiers began to see opportunities where before there had only been despair. For Eli, the reward was not medals or recognition, it was knowing that the impossible had been achieved, that men would live because he had dared to take the shot no one else would. The valley was calm for only a heartbeat. By dawn the next day, German reinforcements began trickling in, scouts and patrols moving cautiously to assess the previous day's chaos. Eli Carter, still perched in the shattered farmhouse, scanned the horizon, his eyes sharpened by exhaustion. And necessity spotted a new threat, a secondary observation post, structurally similar to the one they had just neutralized, now manned by a seasoned German officer and a handful of soldiers. Eli called the squad together. "We have another chance," he whispered, voice low but urgent. "The angles are almost identical. We can hit him through the roof gap, same principle as before, but this time the stakes are higher. He's experienced. It won't be careless." Miller nodded, trust evident in his eyes. The squad moved silently, shadows slipping among rubble and debris, every step calculated to avoid detection. The officer in the German post was alert, scanning the valley floor with practiced precision. He would not make the same mistakes as his predecessor. Eli adjusted his rifle, checking the elevation and wind, recalculating the deflection angle. The round would need to strike the steel beam at precisely the right point, deflect downward through the small gap above the firing slit, targeting a man who is trained to avoid predictable threats. One wrong millimeter, one miscalculation, and the shot would fail, or worse, reveal their position prematurely. Time seemed to stretch. Eli's pulse thundered in his ears. He thought of the men who had died before him, Chen Morrison, Donovan, and of the lives that had been saved by the first impossible shot. The weight of responsibility pressed down. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that ingenuity could outmatch brute force. Okay? That calculated risk could alter the course of a battle. He exhaled slowly, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The squad held their breath, every man frozen, eyes locked on the same distant post. Eli adjusted for the slight wind, the imperfect angle of the beam, the distance precisely measured. The moment arrived, he squeezed the trigger. The M1903 barked. The round flew, a silver streak against the gray morning sky, deflecting off the inner edge of the steel beam, descending with perfect trajectory. Time seemed to slow as Eli followed his path through the scope. The German officer reacted, but it was too late. The bullet struck with surgical precision, and the man crumpled inside the observation post. Chaos erupted again. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting, firing indiscriminately. But the carefully calculated strike had already neutralized the command structure. Eli's squad moved forward, seizing ground that would have been impossible under conventional tactics. Every step was safer. Every advance justified by the ingenuity of one man willing to defy doctrine. Sergeant Miller approached, eyes wide. "Twice in 2 days?" he muttered, voice trembling with awe. "You've done what no one else could even imagine." Okay. Eli lowered his rifle, exhaustion mingling with relief. "It's not me," he said quietly. "It's angles, calculations, and knowing when to take a chance." Across the valley, the enemy struggled to reorganize. Their experience, training, and discipline could not compensate for the unpredictability of a beam gap shot executed with precision. Eli's actions had shifted the psychological balance, instilling doubt and fear. Every soldier knew now that their carefully constructed defenses had a hidden vulnerability. The impact was immediate. The squad advanced without casualties, securing a position that would provide strategic advantage for days to come. Eli's calculations had saved lives once again. His quiet mentorship of the men ensured that the technique would spread without formal recognition. Knowledge, courage, and precision had turned the impossible into a repeatable reality. The valley fell into an uneasy silence. It's a kind that follows a storm but warns that it hasn't yet passed. Eli Carter remained on the ridge, rifle at the ready, scanning the horizon. Every broken wall, every ridge, every shadow held the potential for danger. He knew the enemy wouldn't stay defeated for long. German commanders were resourceful. Intelligence reports would soon prompt countermeasures. Sergeant Miller approached, voice low. Eli, how long do you think we have before they adapt? Eli didn't answer immediately. His mind ran through possibilities, shifts in wind, the placement of structural beams, the height and location of firing slits, enemy patrol routes. It's not long, he finally said, but the advantage is ours for now, and if we move carefully, we can extend it. Squad spread out, moving cautiously from cover to cover. Harper. The medic cast nervous glances at the distant German posts, while Daniels, the radio man, adjusted his gear, ready to relay information if needed. Every soldier understood the significance of Eli's previous shots. They were more than kills. They were demonstrations of a new kind of battlefield thinking, from the shattered farmhouse. Eli observed a small group of German soldiers approaching another strong point farther down the ridge. They moved cautiously, eyes scanning for threats, unaware that a single well-placed shot could disrupt their entire operation. Eli's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, and deflection possibilities. He sketched an invisible diagram in his head, mentally aligning a shot that no one else could even conceive. The opportunity was delicate. The structural gap in the enemy's roof was narrow, misaligned, and partially obstructed by debris. Miscalculation would waste ammunition, alert the Germans, and potentially cost lives. Eli inhaled deeply, steadying his pulse. This was no longer just about taking out one officer. It was about demonstrating that the beam gap technique could consistently shift the tactical advantage, giving his squad and every soldier who learned it a fighting chance. He whispered instructions to Miller and the squad, assigning positions and roles, ensuring they moved in perfect coordination. Watch the flanks, Eli said. Cover angles we can't see. If this works, we advance without losses. The men nodded, understanding the stakes. Kay trusting the calculations and instincts that had repeatedly saved them in the past. Eli adjusted the scope, factoring in the slight breeze, the angle of the steel beam, and the distance to the target. Everything had to align perfectly. His hand rested lightly on the trigger, eyes narrowing, heart steady, despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. He recalled the faces of the men who had fallen before him: Chen, Morrison, Donovan, and the lives that had been spared by his previous shots. The weight of responsibility pressed down, but it also sharpened his focus. The German officer stepped into the firing slit. Eli's pulse slowed, mind clearing. This was the moment when precision, courage, and calculation intersected. He exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the round flew, deflecting off the steel beam with surgical accuracy. The officer crumpled inside the bunker, chaos erupting around him. The squad moved forward immediately, exploiting the disruption. Every step, every movement, every advance was guided by the innovation Eli had introduced, the ability to turn architectural weaknesses into life-saving advantages. The valley was no longer a trap, but a chessboard, and Eli was one move ahead of the enemy at every turn. The message spread silently among the men. Ingenuity could rewrite the rules of engagement. Survival, strategy, and courage were now inseparable. And as the shadows lengthened across the valley, Eli understood one undeniable truth. The fight was far from over. But now, for the first time, the impossible felt achievable. By late afternoon, the valley had shifted in favor of Eli's squad. The enemy, demoralized by 2 consecutive impossible strikes, struggled to regain control. Observation posts that had once dominated the terrain now sat empty or poorly manned, artillery coordination faltering. Every soldier knew that the rules had changed. The old doctrine could no longer guarantee safety, and ingenuity had become the new weapon. Eli crouched behind a crumbling wall, rifle at the ready, watching the Germans scramble to reorganize. Sergeant Miller approached, a mix of awe and disbelief on his face. "I can't believe it," he muttered. "2 officers down, and they're panicking like this. You've done what years of training couldn't?" Eli's eyes didn't leave. "It's not about me," he said softly. "It's about understanding the angles no one else sees. If we can think like they don't, we control the fight." The squad moved forward cautiously, securing high ground and ensuring that every advance was calculated. Harper checked wounded soldiers and provided quick care where needed, while Daniels relayed updates to command. The morale boost was immediate. Men who had been tense and fearful now moved with confidence, reassured that precision and strategy could overcome brute force. The ripple effect of Eli's previous shots was evident. The Germans began repositioning, pulling observers back further from their slits, widening gaps and leaving posts less defended. While these adjustments were logical, they created new vulnerabilities. Structural compromise offered Eli and his squad additional opportunities to exploit the battlefield without unnecessary risk. Eli, methodical as ever, noted every detail, distances between beams, angles of observation, and potential lines of deflection. He shared the principles quietly with the squad, demonstrating how to identify structural weaknesses without attracting attention from higher command. Knowledge was spreading organically, silently transforming the approach of every man in the valley. By evening, the Americans had advanced several hundred yards without a single casualty. The Germans were on edge, forced into defensive improvisation, while Eli's squad remained a step ahead. It's reflected on the men who had died attempting standard methods: Chen, Morrison, Donovan. Their sacrifices had paved the way for success, but the memory of them weighed heavily. Eli knew that innovation came with cost, but the lives saved new and, the ones still at stake, justified every risk taken. As darkness fell, the valley settled into cautious quiet. Fires burned in makeshift camps, and whispers of the beam gap shot traveled among the men. Soldiers sketched diagrams in dirt, shared tips quietly, and prepared for the next engagement. The impact of Eli's actions extended beyond immediate victories. He had created a culture of problem-solving, a willingness to question doctrine, a method for surviving where traditional strategies failed. Miller approached Eli again, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've changed everything, Eli. Not just here, but for everyone who comes after us. They'll teach this technique in training someday." Eli shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter who gets the credit. What matters is that men live because we dared to do what no one else would." In the valley, the American soldiers finally felt a sense of control. The impossible was no longer theoretical. It had been achieved, tested, and repeated. Eli's calculations, courage, and mentorship ensured that each step forward was grounded in precision, strategy, and survival. The night was long, but for the first time in weeks, the men slept without fear of being cut down by unseen artillery. The innovation had turned the tide, not with overwhelming firepower, but with knowledge, patience, and courage. The valley was no longer a trap. It was a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. The battle had moved on. But the impact of Eli's actions lingered long after the echoes of gunfire faded. Observation posts were now approached with caution. Artillery coordination was slower. And every soldier in the valley had witnessed the power of thinking beyond conventional rules. Lee's beam gap technique had shifted the balance, saving countless lives and inspiring a new approach to warfare. Quietly, the knowledge spread. Soldiers shared diagrams in foxholes, whispered calculations in mess halls, and demonstrated angles without calling attention. No officer took credit, no report documented the innovation. It existed in the gaps between orders, a silent revolution, fueled by courage, precision, and necessity. Eli watched from the ridge as patrols moved forward, advancing without casualties. He thought of the men who had died before him, Chun, Morrison, Donovan, the families who would never receive the dreaded telegrams. Their sacrifice had forged a path for survival, proving that one mind willing to challenge doctrine could alter the course of many lives. He returned to the farmhouse as the sun set, rifles slung over his shoulder, exhausted but unbowed. There was no medal, no formal recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that hundreds of men had survived because someone had seen what others could not. Eli's innovation would become doctrine, taught silently to every sniper who followed, shaping battles across Europe without ever being traced back to a single name. He never sought fame, and in the records, his actions were almost invisible. But the lives saved, the innovations shared, and the courage displayed became a lasting legacy, proof that sometimes the difference between life and death is not brute force, but the courage to take an impossible shot.